Hello to everyone who will watch this video. My name is Saren Zarganov and I am a digital email producer for WebMD. Today I am presenting on the subject of web accessibility. Much of what we will cover here will be about accessibility as it relates to email templates, but there will be relevant information for web pages as well. This presentation is intended for web developers and email producers, but it's also relevant to anyone who's involved in the web page or email template production process. Before we start, let's take a quick overview of the topics that we will cover. We'll discuss why accessibility is important. We'll take a look at some best practices when it relates to creative production. In many instances, this is work that is done before the coding actually starts by graphic designers and copywriters. We'll go over some coding principles themselves. If you want a complete guide on coding for accessibility, I'll cite two good references from freecodecamp.org and Litmus in this presentation. We'll go over troubleshooting, which is basically the QA portion of all of this. Next would be the specific law that addresses web accessibility. And lastly, we'll conclude with some important points to keep in mind, just to wrap everything up. So why are accessible digital products important? Well, firstly, there is a moral imperative to make pretty much anything accessible. It's the right thing to do, and I don't think that many people would argue against that. Secondly, and unfortunately, the part that will motivate businesses to be more proactive about this issue is that disabilities that affect the way people interact with the internet are actually prevalent. The World Health Organization estimates that there are around 1.3 billion people with visual impairments, 36 million of which are considered blind. 1 in 12 men and 1 in 200 women are colorblind. In total, that's more than 10% of the world population with visual impairment specifically. So right here, I have a screen reader that shows how a blind person interacts with a simple web page. We'll play a portion of the video to get a sense of their experience before we move on to the next slide.
This is, for example, I'm going to start to read this page.
Navigation 1. Link, University of California, San Francisco. Link, about UCSF. Link, search UCSF.
And what I will now do is slow down the speech rate.
Rating percent, 75%, 70%, 65%, 60%, 55%, 50%, 45%, 40%. Link, UCSF Medical Center.
So as I was about to say, a screen reader converts what's on a computer screen into information that can be displayed through synthetic speech or Braille output. And it does that by allowing you to use a computer instead of a mouse, a computer keyboard instead of a mouse. You can also use a Braille display as an input device.
End of navigation.
And what it does is it cleverly determines what's on the screen and presents you that information in a way that would allow for efficient navigation of these pages. So for example, I could just keep reading.
Banner 3 items.
Design and copy best practices. KISS is a Navy acronym that stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid. The most important pointer to consider here for the coder working with creative people is making sure that emails and web pages are simple and straightforward. This is important for both graphic design and copywriting. For copywriting, Microsoft Word actually has an inbuilt tool that calculates how easy your content is to read on a scale of 0 to 100. The more readable your copy is, the more effective and accessible it is. It's a recommendation that goes beyond web accessibility. For design, you want to make sure that there's a strong contrast between text and backgrounds. My third point here says strong contrast, but you can't really see it because the contrast is so bad. You want to make sure that font text is decently sized. Litmus recommends a minimum of 14 pixels. And you always want to check how templates are perceived by people with color blindness. There are many tools for that, which we'll go over in a later slide. Litmus has a lot of information on this topic in their ultimate guide to email accessibility. Before I move on to the next slide, I just want to clarify that the strong contrast bullet point here intentionally has very bad contrast so that you can barely see it, just to accentuate the point of why strong contrast is important. Coding best practices. There's a lot to cover here. I won't go into all of the specifics because there are many of them and I wouldn't be able to. I recommend free CodeCamp study material on applied accessibility in their responsive web design certificate path section. There's a lot of good stuff there that I enjoyed learning from. One example is they teach you about the importance of alt text, which I think is one of the most simple and important lessons that you can apply to both front-end coding and email coding. Screen readers often read the alt text of the images on web pages and email templates because the person using them can't see the actual image. Because of this, it's important to be descriptive and mindful of the alt text that you write in. For example, we have a little square here. It's a social media footer. You can find these on web pages and email templates. They have these 3 small squares at the bottom that say Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. These are actually alt texts. With images turned on, you would see social media images, the icons that we're all familiar with. Well, when images are turned off, you see the alt text behind them. So if alt text wasn't written in properly for those 3 images, the person using a screen reader or the person with images turned off wouldn't know what these squares link to. That would be very bad and it wouldn't be helpful at all. And we also want to be serious about semantic HTML. It's easy to write out code to render properly for people without disabilities. For example, you don't actually need to use H1 tags to make text look like they're embedded in H1 tags. Often this is exactly what coders do. However, H1 tags and other aspects of HTML actually have semantic importance for screen readers. It specifies what kind of text that should be vocally emphasized, and it helps screen readers navigate web pages. So instead of using H1 tags, it is possible for you to just use span tags and make the text that you want to look like they're embedded in H1 tags be bold and large to make it look exactly like something embedded in H1 tag. But that would be bad practice and it could throw screen readers off. There's a lot of important stuff to study up on here in this presentation. We're only touching the surface, and going beyond H1 tags, there are other important examples like bold tags versus strong tags, emphasized tags versus italic tags. There are just so much to learn here. I recommend free CodeCamp's study material again. If you're unsure about anything in your code, the troubleshooting step of your work is really important here. You want to review your emails and web pages with images turned off and on. You want to test your templates using screen readers, and having a QA checklist would be very helpful in all of this. There are many tools and softwares on the internet that would be very helpful. All of the major web browsers give you the option to disable images. Gmail lets you disable images so that you can set proofs to yourself and see how they look with and without images. Many screen reader softwares are free and are easy to download. In general, the internet gives you a lot to work with. So have an accessibility checklist for yourself and use these tools to make sure your products meet proper standards.
Hater, cloud chaser, you're mad, I'm back, big mad, he's mad, she's mad, big fat, ha, don't care, stay mad,
So you might ask yourself, what the hell does Tekashi69 have to do with any of this? Well, the infamous rapper is known for his legal troubles, and he's actually been sued for an issue relating to Section 508. Section 508 is an amendment to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 that requires government websites to be accessible. Non-government websites are not legally mandated to be accessible, but they are vulnerable to lawsuits if they aren't, which is what happened when Tekashi69 was sued by a blind man for discrimination because his merchandise website didn't meet accessibility standards. So if you're coding for a government entity, you're legally expected to make the product accessible. If you're coding for a private enterprise, you might not think that you're legally mandated to make the product accessible, but you would be leaving the company liable for a lawsuit, which means that they might not be happy with your finished product at the end. In conclusion, accessibility is something that you need to be mindful of from the beginning. This can help save a lot of pain and work in the future. Treat it as a fundamental part of your product. Understand that being serious about accessibility is also a good business decision. You can avoid lawsuits and public relations problems. Think about internet infrastructure the way you do about real-world infrastructure. Buildings and public transportation are often designed for people with wheelchairs and canes. Traffic signals often have loudspeakers that tell people nearby when it's safe to cross the street in case they have visual impairments. The digital landscape can be just as helpful as those examples for people with challenges. It's something that we should all take very seriously and work together on improving.